Today we're going to do things a bit differently. Since we're dealing with the final episode of Anita Sarkeesian's Ordinary Women series, we're going to begin with examining her historical claims first, and then move on to the production quality of the episode.
If you've ever used a computer, smartphone, or a gaming system at any point in your life, then you owe a debt of gratitude to Ada Lovelace.
Wow, 6 seconds in and boom, no sooner do our feet hit the floor than we run into something problematic.
Born in Victorian England during the time of the telegraph and the steam engine, she was the architect of the very first computer program.
No, she was not. Ada Lovelace wrote that computer program for what? Oh, that's right, a computer. A computer that was built by who? Her? No, it was invented by a man, obviously, and this is not a point of dispute. Anita Sarkeesian acknowledges this.
In the end, Babbage never actually built a complete version of his analytical engine, though he's still widely credited as the inventor of the first computer.
So if he created the first computer, why don't we owe him the debt of gratitude, since without him having invented the first computer, there would be nothing for Ada Lovelace to program to begin with. If it took extraordinary brilliance to write a computer program, what about building a machine that had the ability to be programmed in the first place? Isn't that a much bigger intellectual mountain to climb?
Although there's some academic debate about whether her algorithm was truly the first computer program in the modern sense of the word.
False. That's not a debated issue. I've run into disputes surrounding Ada Lovelace's accomplishments, but whether her program counts as a program in the modern sense of the word simply isn't one of them. Laura Hudson repeated this statement in her behind-the-scenes interview for this series.
It's a controversial notion whether or not she created the first computer program, which is something that I discovered. Some of that is semantic, where it's like, you know, is it the first? Similarly, with Murasaki, you know, she created the first modern novel, right? It depends on how you define that. And the question is did she create the first computer program, the first modern computer program? How do we define that?
And that's just not true. There is debate, but not about that. So is Ada Lovelace the world's first computer programmer? No. You can't write a program that would work with a computer without knowing how the computer would work in the first place, and whomever was creating the computer would obviously have written some programs down in the creation of the computer that would run them. At the very least, both the computer and the program have to be developed at the same time. Just from that standpoint alone, if you knew that Charles Babbage was the one who built the computer that Ada programmed, then you don't need any more historical study to figure out, of course Charles Babbage was the first programmer, not Ada Lovelace. You don't need to be a genius to work that out.
You don't have to be a detective to work that out.
But for those for whom that isn't enough, let me read a few things to you. Not surprisingly, Ada's contributions to computer science have been both embellished and diminished, and her true legacy has elicited controversy among historians in the field. Many people, for instance, incorrectly claim that Ada was the first computer programmer. Babbage, not Ada, wrote the first programs for his analytical engine, although most were never published. Although there were earlier sketches for programs that had been prepared by Babbage, Lovelace's were the most elaborate and complete, and they were the first to be published. It is for this achievement that Lovelace is known as the first computer programmer. She was the first person to write and publish a full set of instructions that a computing device could use to reach an end result that had not been calculated in advance. That last quote is from a book called A Passion for Science, Stories of Discovery and Invention. It's published by a website called Finding Ada. This book is filled with stories of women who defied social convention and endemic sexism to excel. To me, they have the same bias and agenda that Anita Sarkeesian and Laura Hudson might have. But even they're careful to point out that, yeah, we call Ada Lovelace the world's first computer programmer, but it's not because she actually wrote the world's first computer program. And wouldn't you know, they say Charles Babbage was the one who wrote the first computer program. I mean, how did they do that? Why would they do that? I mean, I thought Charles Babbage wrote the world's first computer program before I ever read this book. Am I just some really insightful genius that I just happen to know this and agree with the people who wrote this book? This is where it becomes relevant to Anita Sarkeesian and Laura Hudson. They hinged their claim of our debt to Ada Lovelace on the fact that she wrote the first computer program. And since she didn't, well then, I guess if we're going to use their logic, we owe our debt to all of our technology to Charles Babbage, not Ada Lovelace.
It was the first computer program.
Wrong!
Despite a 25-year age difference,
No, there was not a 25-year age difference. It was 23 years, 11 months, and 2 weeks. This is not a humongous error. It doesn't undermine the point that Anita Sarkeesian was making. It's just one more piece of evidence that they had about as much editorial oversight on their script for this episode as Ida B. Wells did for her work in general, i.e., none.
In a letter to a friend, he called Lovelace an enchantress who has thrown her magical spell around the most abstract of sciences and grasped it with a force few masculine intellects could have exerted.
This is going to be nitpicky, but notice here how she said whose, as in whose line is it, and said that in place of who has, which is what the quote actually said. That's not just Anita misreading her lines, it's also a vocabulary error. Whose is not a conjunction of who and has. Can you imagine reading these sentences and replacing them with who has? Who has umbrella did I take? Who has painting won the third prize? Also, she skipped over the word which.
And grasped it with a force few masculine intellects could have exerted.
Not that these errors falsify her quote, but it proves a different point. Anita Sarkeesian has flubbed her lines before. She did in the Jing Shi episode, and we saw that the transcript that they published for the episode had the correct lines in it, i.e. the writer, Laura Hudson, wrote the correct line, and then when it came to the day of filming, Laura Hudson was there, but didn't catch Anita screwing up her lines. We see once again that she could not be trusted to provide quality control in this area, even though she's the one who wrote the correct lines in the script.
The paper, along with her copious notes, was published in 1843, and Lovelace signed it with the initials AAL, hoping to conceal both her famous name and her gender.
She also mistakenly signed one of them as ALL instead of AAL. According to that Scientific American article, Charles Babbage proofread her work, and he also missed that mistake, so it's not a big error, but I'm already being nitpicky, so I'm gonna point it out anyways.
While Babbage viewed his invention as little more than an elaborate calculator, Lovelace saw something more. A revolutionary machine that could weave information the way a loom might weave an intricate pattern and create a new science unto itself.
Yeah, that's true, but where'd she get that idea? Probably because Charles Babbage implemented the use of punch cards in his machine, similar to the ones used in looms to weave certain patterns. Anita says Ada saw something more, weaving information like a loom. Yeah, Charles Babbage gave her the idea. He's the one who implemented the use of punch cards in his machine. Charles Babbage implemented the technology that gave Ada that particular bit of inspiration in the first place.
In the same year, one of her letters to Babbage mentions feeling very ill. She had suffered from poor health throughout her life, which male doctors insisted was the result of scientific work that was just too taxing for the weak feminine intellect. They insisted she was sick because of her intellectual overexertion. Needless to say, they were wrong.
Oh boy, this proved to be a chore. Untangling the morass of mistakes was what Anita just said. I'm going to try and lay this out as clearly as I can. I think it is true that in the 1800s, women's intellect was seen as much weaker than men's. That's not a point of dispute between Anita and me. The problem is, do we have evidence that anybody in Ada Lovelace's life said that you're sick because you're trying to understand something that your weak feminine mind is incapable of understanding? No, and we're going to go over some books and letters to demonstrate that. In the book A Passion for Science, a book we looked at earlier, it says, Augustus de Morgan was a mathematician at the forefront of the emerging field of symbolic logic, and he encouraged Ada to further study mathematics, as she had impressed him mightily with her capabilities. Had Ada been a man, he said, she would have had the potential to become, quote, an original mathematical investigator, perhaps of first-rate eminence. But De Morgan worried that her focus on maths was damaging her health. Ada had been a sickly child, suffering headaches that affected her vision from around age 8. Then in 1829, when she was 13, she caught the measles, which left her paralyzed and confined to bed for a year. She did recover, but it was a slow, arduous journey to the point where in 1831 she could walk again on crutches. De Morgan worried that her health would suffer further if she studied too hard. He said of her maths problems that, quote, the very great tension of mind which they require is beyond the strength of a woman's physical power of application, unquote. But Ada did apply herself, and she did conquer her maths problems. I have to fault this book for their failure to properly quote Augustus de Morgan at this particular point, but we'll get to that later. As they say, Ada suffered from poor health since she was a small child. She got headaches that affected her vision, the measles, and she got paralyzed. In fact, we read in the book Ada's Algorithm that she was frequently ill as a child. Her health was never particularly good, and she suffered from headaches and all manners of other childhood ailments. When Ada was 7.5, she became particularly sick. She suffered from an illness that gave her especially sharp headaches and even affected her eyesight in such a way that her doctor ordered her education to be halted. I don't think anyone needs to have it explained to them that you should stop studying when you're sick. If you're ill, you need to rest. If a woman, or in this case, a little girl, is suffering that badly, then halting her studies would have nothing to do with sexism. That's a dumb maneuver. That's a thing that should be done by male or female alike if their illness is so great. It's this kind of information that we need to keep in mind when we proceed to explore the issue of Ada Lovelace's health. There's no remarks of, well, she's a female, and if she weren't trying to be so smart, she wouldn't be so sick. No, it's, you're ill, you need to rest, stop studying. This book doesn't say if Ada's doctor was a man or a woman, but I'm assuming he was a man. Does that therefore make him sexist? Surely not. In fact, the question we should be asking is, do we have any evidence that Ada Lovelace's doctors ever told her that she was ill because of her weak feminine intellect?
And Ada Lovelace's doctor said her feminine mind was too weak and fragile to handle advanced math. She had suffered from poor health throughout her life, which male doctors insisted was the result of scientific work that was just too taxing for the weak feminine intellect.
See, for me, it's not inconceivable that Ada Lovelace had a doctor who could have said something like that to her. But the thing is, if Ada Lovelace was a healthy woman who only got sick once in a while, then Anita's charges may have some merit. But since Ada was not, we have to take any statement similar to that and say, okay, did they trace her health problems to her studies? Or did they say that her studies would aggravate her previously existing ailments? As we just read, her tutor Augustus de Morgan was worried that her health would suffer further if she studied too hard, not that her health would suffer period if she tried to strain her weak feminine intellect. Unfortunately, that's the closest thing we can find as far as what a male peer said about Ada's health. So when I hear Anita Sarkeesian saying,
Needless to say, they were wrong.
She doesn't know what she's talking about.
Needless to say, they were wrong.
No, Anita Sarkeesian, they weren't. If they were saying what I think they were saying, and that is, your intellectual overexertion will make you more sick, then they were absolutely right, but you wouldn't even think to consider that possibility. What we do know is that Ada Lovelace did attribute one of her mental health struggles to too much mathematics. The book Ada, A Life and a Legacy has the full letter from which this quote comes from, and we'll read it here. Many causes have contributed to produce the past derangements, and I shall in the future avoid them. One ingredient, but only one among many, has been too much mathematics. What are we to make of this? This is Ada Lovelace talking, not a male doctor of hers. If Anita thinks that she is brilliant and extraordinary, then who is Anita to say she was wrong?
They insisted she was sick because of her intellectual overexertion. Needless to say, they were wrong.
Oh, so Ada Lovelace was wrong then, Anita Sarkeesian? You think you're smarter than her? You think you know better? Just saying, you'd have to say something like that if you're gonna say that she was wrong to attribute some of her health problems to her too much mathematics. I wonder how Anita Sarkeesian would go about answering the question, why did this brilliant, extraordinary woman say what she attributes to sexism? Was Ada Lovelace being sexist towards herself? I don't think so, but I'd like to see how Anita Sarkeesian would answer that question. Let's go back once again to the A Passion for Science book. In this quotation, we read about Ada's tutor, Augustus de Morgan. We read, and it is true, that she had impressed him mightily with her capabilities. Had Ada been a man, he said, she would have had the potential to become, quote, an original mathematical investigator, perhaps of first-rate eminence, unquote. We already read all this. But he also worried that her health would suffer further if she studied too hard. He said of her maths problems that the very great tension of mind which they require is beyond the strength of a woman's physical power of application. But Ada did apply herself, and she did conquer her maths problems. As impartial as this feminist book was before, it is here that they made a small blunder with that last quote. Morgan wrote in a letter to Ada's mother that, all women who have published mathematics hitherto have shown knowledge and the power of getting it, but no one has wrestled with difficulties and shown a man's strength in getting over them. The reason is obvious. The very great tension of mind which they require is beyond the strength of a woman's physical power of application. The first problem is that this book attributes the object of Morgan's statements as a specific target to the math problems Ada was trying to surmount. It's saying that he was afraid her health would further degrade because of specific math problems that were too difficult for Ada to understand. And that's just not true. It's not just untrue that he was talking about specific math problems Ada was trying to study, it's also false to say that Morgan thought that Ada lacked the ability to understand them. In fact, he said the exact opposite of that. The very next sentence in this letter says, Lady L has unquestionably as much power as would require all the strength of a man's constitution to bear the fatigue of thought to which it will unquestionably lead her. I can see why Anita Sarkeesian and Laura Hudson would see Augustus de Morgan as a bad guy. He did think, and he fully declared, that he thought women lacked the physical and mental ability to understand math as well as men, and quite frankly, I agree with it. But the point is, Morgan saw Ada Lovelace as an exception to that rule, and ironically, this is what made him worry about her health. Why would it make him worry, you may ask? I mean, if he thought she was just as mentally and physically capable of understanding difficult math as a man, then how could he at the same time worry that her health would get worse if she studied her math too much? It all comes back to my original contention about what people were saying about Ada's health. They were not saying that her education caused her bad health, it was that her studies would aggravate her condition even more than it already had. I have never expressed to Lady Lovelace my opinion of her as a student of these matters. I always feared that it might promote an application to them which might be injurious to a person whose bodily health is not strong. I have therefore contented myself with, very good, quite right, and so on. But I feel bound to tell you that the power of thinking on these matters which Lady L has always shown from the beginning of my correspondence with her has been something so utterly out of the common way for any beginner, man or woman. This power must be duly considered by her friends with reference to the question whether they should urge or check her obvious determination to try not only to reach, but to get beyond the present bounds of knowledge. Her bodily health was not strong, but her determination was, so much so that he was afraid her endeavors would make her more sick than before. Having now, I think, quite explained that you must consider Lady L's case as a peculiar one, I will leave it to your better judgment, supplied with facts, only begging that this note may be confidential. It's funny, Anita had said that her doctor told her her feminine mind was too weak and fragile to handle advanced math. She ignored him and wrote the world's first computer program. That's what she said in her campaign video for the funding for the series.
And Ada Lovelace's doctor said her feminine mind was too weak and fragile to handle advanced math. She ignored him and wrote the world's first computer program.
If Augustus de Morgan is the man that Anita Sarkeesian and Laura Hudson had in mind when they said this, then that statement makes no sense. First, he was talking to Ada's mother, not to Ada herself, so Ada could not have ignored him. Second, he said her feminine mind was just as strong as a man's. Third, Ada had already written her computer program by the time he wrote this letter, so she couldn't have ignored him and then gone on to write the program because the program had already been written. And fourth, why would she ignore him if he was saying she was just as good at understanding math as a man? That's a compliment. Why would she ignore that? Whatever way you slice it, if this is the man that they were talking about when they made this statement, that doesn't make sense. You said that Ada's world was trying to silence and diminish her and that she had to not just be talented, but she had to be defiant.
In a world that was designed to silence and diminish them, they had to be more than just talented. They had to be defiant.
Ada's mother? You know it, you said it yourself. She was the one who had Ada Lovelace study math and science as a child.
She encouraged her daughter to pursue math and science, but frowned on poetry, imagination, or really anything that reminded her of her wayward husband.
Ada didn't need to defy her. And as for her father, you said this too, you know this. Ada's mother left their father and took Ada with her, and she never saw her father again.
Tired of his misbehavior, Lady Byron left him only a month after their daughter was born, stealing away with the baby as he slept. Ada would never see her father again.
She didn't need to defy him. Ada had a male math tutor who not only saw her as a genius, but he tutored her for free. And this is all in addition to Charles Babbage, that super smart computer inventing genius who didn't snub her. He showed her, you said this in your video, he showed her the prototype for his difference engine when she was 17, and he went on to praise her intellect to the high heavens. Ada Lovelace is quite probably the very least defined woman of history you could have possibly chosen to make a video about. Your series is a joke, not just in terms of production quality, but in terms of the basic facts of history. Speaking of which, we will now move on to the production quality of this episode. The animation, while still boring, is at least colorful. The audio for this episode is really good. It's way better than episodes 3 and 4. It's good to see that some editors somewhere along the line got this one right. Oh wait, Anita Sarkeesian is the editor, isn't she?
Yeah.
The tape editor.
yeah, that would be me. Great.
Hey Anita, does this mean that all the outrageous audio problems in episodes 3 and 4 are your fault? I don't know. Heck, I doubt that you really are the editor of your series. You could have passed this duty on to Noodle House as far as I'm concerned, but one way or another, you probably should have figured that out by now. It's not like you haven't been seriously YouTubing for 7 years or anything. Speaking of Noodle House, here's a budget breakdown for this episode. This episode turned out to be the most inexpensive episode in this series. Inexpensive, that is, in terms of amount of money spent per second. The real question has always been, is the animation worth the money? And I've consistently said, No. Altogether for this entire series combined, we have 999 seconds of animation. Maybe I was off by a few fractions of a second and there was an even thousand. For simple math, we'll say there was 1,000 total seconds of animation in this series. They said each episode was going to get $25,000 each to produce the animation, which means that if Feminist Frequency was telling the truth, they spent $125,000, that's $125 per second, for 16 minutes and 40 seconds of animation. Not even 20 minutes tops for 125 grand. If Feminist Frequency was telling the truth, which I don't believe for a second. If you're watching this video and you've seen Anita's Ordinary Women series or even my rebuttals, you know the animation isn't worth that kind of money. To put this into perspective, an average episode of the original Full Metal Alchemist anime cost $85,130.38 per episode. For that kind of money, you get quality animation like this, and you get more than 20 minutes each time. It illustrates the irony. People who are paid so much less money can do so much more, and these other people are paid far more money and give so much less in return. You know what would be awesome is if we could get an interview with Matthew Stainer, the founder of Noodle House, who was there with them when they were filming the Ordinary Women series.
Anita came to us and she said she wanted to do something different, something about women in history, about brave women in history. And we were instantly excited about that.
I mean, there he is. He's there on the day of the shoot, and he says he was instantly excited when Anita pitched the idea to him. I mean, boy, wouldn't it be cool if we could just ask him directly, "Hey, Mr. Stainer, were you really paid 125 grand for this animation? Did you receive like a lump sum payment of some kind of $125,000 from Feminist Frequency? Or even, hey, why was your animation for the Jingxi episode so good, but all the others were so lame by comparison, even though Feminist Frequency asked for the same amount of money for each episode's animation? Can you explain why $25,000 for the Jingxi episode got us this, but it also got us lousy stuff like this in the other episodes?" I guess they'd never talk to me, though. I've been so harsh and negative towards Noodle House. It would be too much to expect them to want to meet with me, right? Oh, wait. Maybe they would. Imagine my surprise when a YouTube channel named Noodle House commented on my Jingxi video and said the following. "Hey Prince, thanks for noticing our work. Love it or hate it, totally fair. We're always looking to improve, so if you're ever in the LA area, and if you would like more information about what we do, we are inviting you to come to our shop to meet the nice artist who worked on the animations you've mentioned. We can show you the entire process step by step. We welcome any and all comments or ideas about how we can improve the creative process. Feel free to check out our website or contact us by email or phone. You're always welcome." Well, that sounds like a good faith invitation to me, doesn't it? I mean, I criticized their work harshly, but love it or hate it, they thanked me for noticing their work and said, "Hey, come to our shop in LA in person. Or contact them by email or phone because I'm always welcome." I accepted, of course, and I went ahead and messaged them through their website to try and arrange a Skype conversation with them, and nothing happened. I went ahead and replied to their comment a second time to let them know I'm trying to get in touch with them, and no response. I tweeted them with a screenshot of their invitation, and still no response. It's almost like they were lying with that invitation. Not sure why they would do that, since they didn't need to invite me in the first place, so I'm gonna make this real simple. Hey, Matthew Stainer, Noodle House, I accept your invitation. I have questions for you. Let's do a live Google Hangout stream even. You thought it was cool for me to notice your work? I have thousands of subscribers. Let's make this happen. In fact, here's their Twitter handle. Let's see if we can't get these guys to give me an interview. Go and tweet at the Noodle House that you'd like them to do an interview with at Prince Asbel. I bet if we could get enough people to flood their Twitter account that they would make good on their invitation. All that aside, though, it's striking to me that there is so much wrong with this series in terms of production quality. But what's even more striking is the irony of this particular episode, because I was reminded of what Laura Hudson said in her behind-the-scenes interview for this episode. She said that this episode's script was her favorite. Why? I'll let her explain why.
I think my favorite script is Ada Lovelace. And that's partly because as I was researching her, you know, it's a controversial notion whether or not she created the first computer program. But what I found more disturbing was the amount of discourse around her that had to do with undermining her and suggesting that she actually hadn't contributed something incredible or even anything valuable at all. There was, you know, it's sort of textbook undermining of women, where there's, you know, some people suggest that she didn't write it. The problem that we were talking about wasn't even happening in the past. It was happening now. The same undermining that she was experiencing then, it never stopped. It continued. It's still happening.
I have to marvel at how ironic it is that Laura Hudson said this script was her favorite because she's tired of people undermining women's accomplishments. We've already seen how unhindered Ada Lovelace was in her life, but take the Ordinary Women series as a whole. In my rebuttal videos, I have punched through hole after hole and sometimes even put some of their episodes through the shredder. These women invested a total of $145,000 by their own figures into this series, $20,000 in pre-production, and then the extra $125,000 they put into the animation. They even asked for and got another $75,000 for donor gifts and marketing. They had a studio with equipment and tools provided to them for free. Every advantage in the world was placed at their feet to make this series awesome. And what happened? They failed. Yes, I undermine their accomplishments because they have zero excuse for their failures. These episodes are pathetically short. Anita Sarkeesian made herself look like an idiot. Laura Hudson let her flub her lines. I didn't even touch on this earlier. I almost forgot. Laura Hudson, she was there. You know, those misquotations we heard earlier? They took at least 4 takes of this episode.
Ada, take 4?
4 takes, and they still couldn't get her lines right. Good job, Laura Hudson. Good job. Gosh, you guys suck so much. Oh my god. Where was I? Not to mention the questionable, if not downright false things they said about all these women. They got their dates wrong, they got their ages wrong, they got their accomplishments wrong, the environment they lived in wrong, and yet Laura Hudson is just so frustrated that people are skeptical of women's accomplishments. What might be the reason for why they're so bad at doing what they're doing?
You know, so that was the most interesting one to me, because I felt like when we were writing that, we chose deliberately to make that statement. She was the first computer programmer, you know, and to some degree, that's the only script that I feel like is speaking directly to certain people. You know, I feel like from my perspective, it's addressing those critics.
Yeah, that was Laura Hudson, saying that she wanted to make the definitive statement that Ada Lovelace was the first computer programmer because she wanted to get back at people who undermine women's accomplishments. Not because of the proof, not because the evidence says that, because she wanted to get back at some people. Laura Hudson, it's not just because you're a feminist that people are skeptical of your work. People who do hard work and do accomplish things are skeptical of your work for this very kind of reason. What you just said to that fawning interviewer is retarded. It's one of the stupidest things I could ever heard someone say, that they were going to make a definitive statement about a historical situation, not because they had the proof, but because they wanted to get back at a bunch of critics. That's ridiculous. I mean, you could have said, hey, you know what? I'm going to address those critics, so I'll show them definitive proof that Ada Lovelace is the world's first computer programmer. Oh, wait, I forgot. You don't have any proof like that, so you'll just say that she was the first computer programmer. Yeah, that'll address those critics. Oh, boy, that'll show them. Oh, my God. In conclusion, there's one final thing I want to mention that I didn't notice before when I shot the original ending to this video. None of the Ordinary Women episodes have hit 100,000 views, including the Emma Goldman episode, the first episode they released 4 months ago. However, there is one video that did break 100,000 views. It's the campaign video where they asked for the money to make the series. Yeah, that's right. The most popular Ordinary Women video Feminist Frequency has made is not even an episode of their series. It's the video where they ask people for the money to make it. Probably one of the reasons why Anita and her friends had this to say at the end of last year.
And to say with all sincerity from the bottom of our hearts,
2016.
We'll see you in the new year.
Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody. Like and subscribe, and I can't wait to see you again on the Prince Asbel channel.